Good evening and welcome back. Imagine, if you will, that you are stepping out of the modern world entirely, leaving behind the constant hum of notifications, the bright glare of screens, and the frantic pace of the day. Instead, imagine you are walking down a quiet, stone-walled corridor, deep beneath the stone arches of an ancient library. Tonight, we are embarking on a journey into a riddle that has resisted the finest minds of humanity for hundreds of years. It is a story wrapped in vellum, written in an alphabet that no alive human can read, and filled with illustrations of plants that do not exist on this earth. It is a book that feels less like a historical artifact and more like a stray object that somehow slipped through a tear in the fabric of time. But before we get completely comfortable and begin to turn those faded, mysterious pages, take just a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Only, of course, if you genuinely enjoy spending these quiet evenings exploring the past with me. It helps more than you know to keep these stories alive. And as always, I would love to see where you are listening from tonight. Drop your location and your local time in the comments below. Whether you are listening from a quiet bedroom in a bustling city or a cabin out in the countryside, knowing that we are all settling in together under the same blanket of night brings a wonderful sense of peace. So now, dim the lights, adjust your pillow, let your shoulders drop, and let the tension leave your mind. Let us ease into tonight's journey together and lose ourselves in the shifting, hypnotic shadows of the world's most mysterious book. To truly understand the weight of this enigma, we have to travel back in time to the year 1912 to a beautiful sun-drenched hill just outside Rome, Italy. Here stood the Villa Mondragone, a grand and historic palace that had once belonged to popes and cardinals, but by the early 20th century it was owned by the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits. The priests were facing quiet financial difficulties, and to raise funds to maintain their beautiful, sprawling property, they made a decision to discreetly sell a portion of their private library. They invited a man named Wilfrid Voynich to come and inspect their hidden archives. Voynich was an extraordinary figure in his own right. Born in Poland, he was a revolutionary in his youth, a man who had escaped the frozen wastes of a Siberian exile and eventually made his way to London, where he established himself as one of the world's most prominent dealers in rare antiquarian books. He had an incredible eye for the forgotten, the obscure, and the ancient. As Voynich walked through the dusty, shadow-drenched rooms of the villa, the priests led him to a chest filled with old, leather-bound volumes that had been hidden away for generations. He began to look through them, handling the heavy covers, feeling the rough texture of centuries-old bindings. Most of the books were exactly what one would expect to find in an old Jesuit collection: theological treatises, Latin commentaries, historical records of the church. But then, near the bottom of the collection, his fingers brushed against a relatively small, unpretentious volume. It lacked a proper leather cover. Instead, it was bound in a simple, heavy sheet of blank, yellowish vellum, looking worn, stained, and entirely anonymous. There was no title on the spine. There was no author's name written on the front. It looked like an old, neglected notebook that someone had thrown into a box and forgotten. But when Wilfrid Voynich opened that plain vellum cover, the world seemed to shift. As he turned the first leaf, he found himself staring at a page covered in a dense, beautiful, flowing script. At first glance, it looked like it might be Latin, or perhaps an ancient form of Greek, or some obscure dialect of medieval German. But as his eyes traced the elegant characters, he realized with a creeping sense of shock that he could not read a single word. Not only could he not read the words, but he did not recognize the individual letters. They were formed with absolute confidence, written by a steady, practiced hand that never wavered, never blundered, and never left a single scratch out or correction. It looked like a real language, but it was an alphabet that did not exist in any linguistic manual known to mankind. And then, as he kept turning the pages, the mystery deepened into something truly surreal. The text was surrounded by hundreds of hand-drawn illustrations, coloured with faded washes of green, brown, blue, and yellow ink. There were drawings of elaborate, bizarre plants with roots that looked like human figures or coiled serpents, and leaves that defied botanical logic. There were circular astronomical diagrams featuring stars, suns with human faces, and strange, unidentifiable constellations. Further into the book, there were pages showing small, nude figures of women, bathing in complex networks of green pools, interconnected by elaborate systems of pipes, tubes, and channels that looked almost like human organs or industrial plumbing. Voynich knew instantly that he was holding something utterly unprecedented. He bought the manuscript from the Jesuits, along with several other volumes, and brought it back to England and later to America. He dedicated the entire rest of his life to trying to unlock its secrets. He made photographic copies and sent them to the world's leading paleographers, historians, linguists, and codebreakers. He believed, with an intensity that bordered on obsession, that the manuscript held hidden scientific or philosophical breakthroughs from the Middle Ages, perhaps written by a legendary figure like the Franciscan friar Roger Bacon, who had to hide his advanced knowledge from the prying eyes of the Inquisition. But no matter who looked at it, the result was always the same: absolute silence. The book refused to speak. When we look at the physical object itself, which is now safely housed in the Voynichese Rare Book and Manuscript Library at Yale University, catalogued simply as MS-408. It reveals a quiet, physical history that is just as fascinating as the text written upon it. If you were to hold it in your hands today, in the soft, temperature-controlled light of the archive, the first thing you would notice is its size. It is surprisingly intimate. It measures roughly 9 inches high by 6 inches wide, making it about the size of a modern hardcover novel. It is not a massive, heavy altar book meant to be read on a grand lectern. It is a personal book, something meant to be held close, carried in a satchel, or kept on a small private desk. The material of the pages is vellum, which is a fine parchment made from the skin of animals, usually calves, sheep, or goats. In the medieval period, preparing vellum was a labour-intensive, highly skilled craft. The animal hides had to be soaked in lime, scraped thoroughly to remove hair and flesh, stretched tightly on large wooden frames, and scraped again with a crescent-shaped knife until the skin reached a uniform, paper-like thinness. As you turn the pages of the Voynich Manuscript, you can feel the natural variations in the material. Some pages are smooth, soft, and ivory white, while others are rougher, showing the natural grain of the animal's skin, with yellowish stains and tiny imperfections where the hide was stretched to its absolute limit. Modern science has allowed us to look closer at this physical body than Wilfred Voynich ever could. In the early 21st century, scientists took tiny microscopic samples from different pages of the manuscript and subjected them to carbon-14 dating. This process measures the decay of carbon isotopes within the organic material to determine exactly when the animal lived. The results were definitive, and throughout many old theories, the vellum was created somewhere between the years 1404 and 1438. This places the physical creation of the book squarely in the early Renaissance, a period when Western Europe was transitioning out of the Middle Ages, a time of profound artistic revival, scientific curiosity, and political upheaval. The ink used to write the strange script and draw the bizarre illustrations has also been analysed using advanced spectroscopy. The text itself was written using an iron gall ink, which was the standard writing material of the medieval and Renaissance eras. It was made by mixing crushed oak galls, round, parasite-induced growths found on oak trees, with iron sulfate and water. When first written, iron gall ink has a deep purplish-black colour, but over the centuries, as it reacts with oxygen and the acids within the parchment, it slowly matures into a soft, warm, comforting shade of brown. This is exactly what we see on the pages of the manuscript today, a gentle, faded brown ink that has bitten softly into the vellum over 600 years. The coloured paints used for the illustrations are similarly authentic to the 15th century, derived from natural minerals and plant dyes like copper-based greens and iron oxide reds. But the physical structure of the book holds its own dark secrets. Books from this era were not made of single sheets bound together. They were composed of quires, which are gatherings of several sheets folded together like a small booklet, which are then sewn into the spine. Over its long, perilous journey through history, the Voynich Manuscript has been damaged and altered. Expert analysis of the sewing holes and the numbering on the pages shows that several leaves are missing. Originally, the book may have had as many as 116 sheets, but today, only 104 remain. Someone, at some point in the distant past, deliberately cut or tore pages out of this book. Were those missing pages filled with even more controversial drawings? Did they contain a key or a cipher that would have allowed us to read the text? We can only wonder as we stare at the clean, silent cuts left in the binding. One of the most extraordinary physical features of the manuscript is its fold-out pages. Most books are strictly uniform, but the creator of this volume wanted to present information on a scale that exceeded the boundaries of a single leaf. There are pages that unfold into double-sized spreads, triple-sized diagrams, and even a massive 6-page fold-out illustration that measures over 2 feet across, containing a complex arrangement of circular designs that look like an atlas of interconnected islands, castles, and cosmic pathways. To create these fold-outs, the scribe had to carefully select larger hides, cut them into complex shapes, and fold them with absolute precision so that they would fit neatly back into the quiet confines of the small vellum binding when closed. As you sit in the silence of your mind, visualizing this object, look closely at the handwriting. This is perhaps the most mesmerizing element of the physical enigma. When someone tries to forge a language or write a complex code that they are inventing as they go, their handwriting usually betrays them. There are moments of hesitation. The pen stops as the writer thinks about the next symbol. The lines show tremors, or the ink pools in certain spots where the hand paused. The characters look stiff, self-conscious, and unnatural. But the text of the Voynich manuscript shows none of this. It flows with an astonishing, hypnotic fluidity. The scribe wrote with incredible speed and confidence, using a light, elegant touch. The letters curve and loop across the page like music, maintaining a consistent size, spacing, and rhythm from the top of a page to the very bottom. It is the handwriting of someone who was completely fluent in whatever they were writing. It feels as natural as a modern person writing a letter to a friend or a scholar, taking quick notes in a university lecture. There are thousands upon thousands of individual characters, yet there is not a single blotch, not a single crossed-out word, and no evidence of a pencil guideline drawn underneath to keep the lines straight. Whoever wrote this knew exactly what they wanted to say, and their hand moved across the vellum with a calm, unbothered certainty that has driven modern researchers to the brink of madness. This confidence creates an uncanny sensation when you look at the pages. You feel an immediate, powerful connection to the person who sat at a wooden desk under the flickering light of a candle or the soft morning light of a window 6 centuries ago. You can see the angle at which they held their quill, the pressure they applied to the tip to create a thicker line on a downward stroke, and the gentle lift of their hand at the end of a sentence. They were real. They breathed the air of the 15th century. They had a purpose, a message, a world of knowledge or imagination that they desperately wanted to preserve within these pages. Yet, despite that intense physical presence left by their pen, they remain completely invisible to us, hidden behind a wall of beautiful, impenetrable symbols. The condition of the first page of the manuscript tells a quiet story of its own. It is heavily worn, darkened by centuries of exposure to air, light, and the oils of human fingers. If you look at it under ultraviolet light, you can see faint, faded inscriptions at the very bottom of the page, names that have been erased or washed away by later owners who wanted to claim the book for themselves. These ghost signatures are the only clues we have to the early hands that touched this volume, a trail of breadcrumbs leading back through royal courts and dark laboratories, which we will explore as our journey deepens. For now, let your mind rest on the sheer survival of this object. Think of all the historical storms it had to endure to reach the safety of the 21st century. It survived the collapse of empires, the bloody religious wars that tore Europe apart in the 17th century, the rise and fall of libraries, the dampness of secret cellars, and the hunger of parchment-eating insects. It survived because someone, at every stage of its history, looked at it and realized that it was too precious, too strange, and too beautiful to destroy. They kept it safe, passing it from hand to hand, until it finally came out of the shadows of the Italian villa and into the light of the modern world. As we prepare to dive deeper into the specific images and sections that make up this surreal volume, let the physical image of the book settle in your thoughts. The warm, textured touch of the old calfskin binding, the soft rustle of the thick vellum pages as they turn, and the elegant, rhythmic flow of the brown iron gall ink. It is a labyrinth made of parchment and thought, a monument to human secrecy that continues to sit quietly in its glass case, holding its breath, waiting for someone to finally find the key. As the plain vellum cover closes in our minds, we turn the page once more to venture deeper into the interior of the manuscript. Having felt the texture of the vellum and seen the confident sweep of the scribe's hand, we now find ourselves standing at the edge of a completely different realm. The visual world of the author. If the text is a locked door, the illustrations are the windows looking into a landscape that feels simultaneously ancient, familiar, and entirely alien. To turn the pages of the Voynich Manuscript is to walk through an illustrated encyclopedia compiled by a mind that saw connections between things that modern science has long since separated. The book is not a chaotic jumble of drawings. It is structured with immense care, divided into distinct thematic sections that scholars have categorized based on their visual content. These sections behave like chapters in a lost book of universal knowledge, moving from the earth beneath our feet, up to the stars in the heavens, down into mysterious subterranean waters, and finally into the concentrated essences of life itself. The journey begins with the largest and most prominent part of the book, the botanical section. This opening movement occupies more than half of the entire manuscript, containing over 100 full-page drawings of plants. In the 15th century, herbal books, known as herbals, were incredibly common. They were practical manuals used by physicians, monks, and apothecaries to identify medicinal plants, detailing how to harvest their leaves, roots, and flowers to mix remedies for everything from fevers to fractures. These medieval herbals followed strict artistic conventions. Even when the drawings were stylized or poorly copied from older texts, a trained eye could easily recognize the jagged leaves of a dandelion, the soft petals of a rose, or the distinct roots of a mandrake. But when you look at the botanical drawings in the Voynich Manuscript, a profound sense of disorientation sets in. At first glance, they look exactly like standard medieval botanical illustrations. They feature stems, leaves, roots, flowers, and seed pods, all painted in soft, comforting washes of forest green, earthy brown, muted yellow, and faded red. But the moment a botanist looks closer, trying to classify these specimens into known plant families, the illusion shatters. The plants defy the laws of nature. Imagine a plant with smooth, rounded leaves that look like they belong to a water lily, but from its stem grows a jagged, thorny flower resembling a thistle, which terminates in a root system shaped like a series of hollow, interlocking wooden pipes. On another page, a tall, elegant stalk is crowned with clusters of deep blue flowers that look entirely plausible, but its leaves are arranged in unnatural geometric patterns that resemble serrated saw blades, and its base swells into a bulbous, fleshy root that looks remarkably like a pair of human feet tucked sole to sole. It is a garden of chimeras. The author did not draw from life, they stitched parts together. One plant features a stem that splits into two completely different types of foliage. One side smooth and oval, the other side deeply lobed and serrated, suggesting two entirely different species grafted onto a single root. Many of the flowers look like complex architectural structures, with petals that fold over each other like medieval battlements, or open up to reveal small, multi-chambered pods that look like tiny, secret boxes. The roots are perhaps the most unsettling part of this dream garden. In traditional medieval botany, roots were often drawn with a touch of folklore. The mandrake root, for instance, was famously depicted as a human figure because of its bifurcated shape. In the Voynich Manuscript, this concept is elevated to an abstract, artistic principle. The roots do not look like fibrous strings meant to draw water from the soil, they look like conscious designs. Some are coiled like sleeping vipers, others are segmented like the shells of lobed insects or crabs. There are roots that look like intricate knots of rope, and others that feature distinct, intentional holes carved through their centres, as if they were designed to be threaded onto a cord. For decades, modern botanists have examined these pages, desperate to find even a single definitive match. Occasionally, a leaf or a flower will tease the mind with a passing resemblance to a real-world plant. A drawing might suggest a wild violet, a sunflower, or a type of alpine fern. In the 1940s, an American botanist named Hugh O'Neill claimed he could identify a few specific New World plants, including an image that bore a striking resemblance to a sunflower and another that looked like red pepper, which would mean the manuscript had to be created after Christopher Columbus returned from the Americas in 1492. However, this theory collapsed when carbon dating firmly placed the vellum in the early 1400s. Long before Columbus set sail, the sunflower was merely an artistic coincidence, a circular, multi-petaled flowerhead born entirely from the scribe's imagination. The garden of the Voynich Manuscript remains a place that never grew under our sun, a collection of floral cryptids preserved in iron gall ink. Leaving the silent, impossible fields of the botanical section behind, we lift our eyes from the earth and look toward the sky. The manuscript transitions seamlessly into the astronomical and astrological section, where the pages open up into grand, circular diagrams that mimic the clockwork movement of the medieval cosmos. To the 15th century mind, astronomy and medicine were deeply intertwined. A doctor would never dream of performing surgery, bloodletting, or administering a potent herbal remedy without first checking the position of the stars and the moon. Each sign of the zodiac ruled over a specific part of the human body, and each planet exerted an invisible, liquid pull on the humours of the flesh. Therefore, a book detailing secret knowledge or medical remedies would naturally include a map of the heavens. The celestial diagrams in the Voynich Manuscript are beautiful, hypnotic compositions. They are dominated by large, concentric circles that pull the eye inward toward a central focal point. In many of these diagrams, the centre is occupied by a sun or a moon, with a distinct human face. These faces are drawn with a charming, minimalist simplicity. Two quiet eyes, a straight nose, and a small, unsmiling mouth, staring out from amidst radiating beams of light or crescent curves. Surrounding these central luminaries are rings of text and stars. The stars are not scattered randomly across the page like the night sky. They are arranged in neat, orderly rows that follow the curvature of the diagrams, connected to the centre by fine radiating lines like the spokes of a cosmic bicycle wheel. Some diagrams contain dozens of these small, hand-drawn stars, each painted with a delicate centre of blue or yellow ink. As you turn these celestial pages, you encounter a series of 12 diagrams that are immediately recognizable to anyone familiar with ancient astrology, the signs of the zodiac. Each page features a central emblem representing a specific astrological constellation, surrounded by concentric rings of human figures and text. But even here, where the author is clearly operating within an established cultural tradition, the unique, surreal signature of the manuscript asserts itself. The zodiac sequence is incomplete, with some months missing due to lost pages, but the remaining diagrams are mesmerizing. In the center of the diagram for Pisces, we see two small detailed fish swimming in opposite directions, connected by a faint cord. For Taurus, a small stubborn bull stands proudly in the center of the circle. For Scorpio, a creature that looks like a strange hybrid of a lizard and a scorpion crawls across the parchment. What makes these zodiac wheels truly extraordinary, however, is the ring of people surrounding the central animals. On each page, the outer circles are populated by a ring of small, delicately drawn figures, almost exclusively women, who appear to be stepping out of the text itself. Each woman is drawn naked, or wearing only a thin, gossamer veil, and many of them emerge from what look like small barrels, tubs, or crescent-shaped clouds that form the boundary of the ring. Each of these tiny figures holds a star in her hand. Some hold them high above their heads like lanterns, guiding the way through the dark. Others hold them close to their chests, or appear to be tossing them to the figure next to them in a slow-motion, cosmic dance. The repetition of these figures creates a powerful, rhythmic visual chant as you flip through the pages. It is as if the author was illustrating not just the passive stars, but the living, spiritual intelligences that move the planets through the night sky. The script winds tightly around these figures, filling every available space between the stars and the bodies, creating an intricate web of text and human form that holds the heavens in place. From the high, silent reaches of the stars, the manuscript suddenly plunges downward, deep into the earth, entering the most surreal and visually striking portion of the entire volume, the balneological section. The word balneological refers to the study of baths and natural springs, but nothing in the real world of medieval bathing prepares you for what is written on these pages. This section is entirely dominated by drawings of small, naked women, often referred to by scholars as nymphae or nymphs. Unlike the figures in the zodiac section, who stand statically within cosmic wheels, these nymphs are engaged in strange, purposeful, and collective activities. They are depicted interacting with an elaborate, labyrinthine network of water systems that defies simple explanation. Imagine a page where 20 small hand-drawn women are immersed up to their waists in a series of green-tinted pools. The pools are not natural ponds or stone baths. They are constructed out of complex, organic-looking containers that look like a cross between chemical laboratory equipment and human internal organs. These pools are connected to one another by an intricate network of curved tubes, pipes, and stone conduits. Water, or some mysterious fluid represented by waves of green and blue paint, flows visibly through these channels, pouring from one pool into another. The nymphs within these pools are drawn with an unself-conscious, naturalistic simplicity. They are not idealized, classical beauties. They have rounded bellies, soft figures, and expressions of quiet concentration. They are actively managing the fluid system. Some stand at the mouth of a pipe, holding their hands out to direct the flow of the water. Others are nestled together in tight groups inside a single tub, holding on to one another's arms or shoulders as if sharing warmth or performing a communal ritual. Some are shown sliding down inside curved tubes, moving from an upper level of the system down into a lower reservoir like passengers on a subterranean slide. The level of detail in these plumbing networks is staggering. The pipes are often segmented, looking like the armoured segments of an earthworm or the bamboo stalks of the east. Some pipes terminate in animal heads, serpents or dragons with open jaws that spit the green fluid into waiting basins. Other sections of the waterworks look like complex distillation apparatuses that you might find in an early alchemist's workshop, filled with bubbling liquids and vapours. What is the meaning of this liquid labyrinth? For centuries, this question has haunted researchers. Some look at the drawings and see a highly allegorical manual for early human anatomy and gynecology. In the 15th century, the inner workings of the human body were a deep mystery, often described using mechanical or environmental metaphors. The stomach was seen as a boiling pot, the liver was a furnace, the veins were irrigation canals distributing life across the fields of the flesh. It is entirely possible that the author of the Voynich Manuscript was illustrating the internal processes of reproduction, digestion, or the circulation of vital fluids, using the small naked figures to represent the living forces that keep the biological machine running. Others see a guide to medieval hydrotherapy and spa culture. In the Renaissance, natural hot springs and mineral baths were highly prized for their healing properties. Wealthy individuals would travel across Europe to sit in the volcanic waters of Italy or Germany, hoping to cure their arthritis, skin conditions, or infertility. The balneological section could be a highly stylized guide to the hidden network of the Earth's internal waters, explaining how volcanic heat and minerals combine to create healing springs. Yet, as you stare at the images of these women smiling quietly as they sit in their interconnected green tubs, a deeper, more esoteric possibility presents itself. The imagery feels spiritual, almost religious, yet it aligns with no known Christian, Jewish, or Islamic iconography of the period. It feels like a glimpse into a secret, heretical subculture, or the private mythology of a lonely genius who saw water as the great connective tissue between the mineral world of the earth and the living world of the flesh. The text wraps around the pipes and pools, hugging the curves of the stone channels, and filling the empty spaces between the women's heads, keeping its secrets safe while the green water flows eternally across the vellum. Following the watery descent of the balneological section, the manuscript transitions into the pharmaceutical section. Here, the focus narrows down from broad systems into specific, highly concentrated tools of healing. The imagery shifts to a series of small, beautifully detailed drawings that line the margins of the pages like rows of jars on a dark shelf. This section combines elements of botany with the practical tools of the apothecary. On one side of a page, you will see a drawing of a small fragment of a plant, usually just a leaf, a single flower, or a highly specific slice of a root, rather than the full-scale botanical illustrations seen at the beginning of the book. Next to these plant fragments sit rows of ornate, colourful containers that are immediately recognisable to historians of science as albarelli. An albarello was a specific type of ceramic earthenware jar used by medieval and Renaissance pharmacists to store dried herbs, ointments, syrups, and chemical powders. They were typically designed with an hourglass shape, slightly narrower in the middle, so that an apothecary could easily reach into a crowded shelf and pull a jar down without dropping it. The jars in the Voynich Manuscript are drawn with a delightful, whimsical variety of designs. Some are striped with vibrant bands of blue and yellow, others are decorated with geometric lattices, checks, or stylized crenellations that look like the towers of a tiny castle. The pairing of these jars with specific plant parts suggests a clear, practical purpose. This was a recipe book, a formulary for the preparation of compounds. The text in this section is arranged in short, compact paragraphs that sit right next to each jar and root fragment, looking precisely like a list of ingredients, measurements, and instructions for preparation. You can almost smell the sharp, earthy scent of crushed herbs, the sweet tang of preservation honey, and the bitter smoke of an apothecary's fire as you trace the lines of text with your eyes. But just like the botanical section, the practical utility of this pharmaceutical guide is entirely subverted by its unreadability. We see the root, we see the jar, we see the neat paragraph of instructions. But we can never know if the recipe is for a life-saving medicine, a deadly poison, a cosmetic cream, or an alchemical tincture meant to transform base metals into gold. The jars remain sealed by the code, the herbs remain unnamed. Finally, the manuscript reaches its mysterious conclusion in a section that scholars refer to as the stars or recipe section, which reads like a long, quiet chant before the book falls into complete silence. This final movement consists of over 20 pages entirely devoid of large illustrations. Instead, the margins are decorated with long, vertical columns of small, individual stars. Each paragraph of text on these pages begins with a small star, drawn with 5 or 6 points, and coloured with a tiny drop of yellow or blue paint. The text flows outward from each star, running across the page in long, unbroken lines. There are no drawings of plants, no naked women, and no astronomical wheels here, just a relentless, rhythmic progression of the script, page after page, punctuated only by the steady, quiet presence of those miniature celestial markers. This layout strongly resembles a medieval collection of recipes or short aphorisms. Each star acts as a bullet point, signalling the start of a new thought, a new instruction, or a new observation. The absence of large illustrations gives this final section an intense, concentrated focus. The author has stopped painting their world. They are now simply writing it down, pouring out a massive volume of information before the vellum runs out. It feels like a grand, philosophical summary, a collection of universal laws or secret formulas that tie everything together: the plants, the heavens, the pools of water, and the apothecary jars into a single, unified theory of reality. As you look across the entirety of this illustrated cosmos, the most striking realization is the complete coherence of the vision. The author did not change their mind halfway through the book. The style of the drawings, the colour palette, the whimsical yet structured approach to the natural world, everything remains absolutely consistent from the first page to the last. Whoever made this book had a highly sophisticated, fully formed system of thought. They knew exactly how the universe worked, and they spent years of intense, painstaking labour drawing its hidden machinery on the vellum. Let your mind wander through those green pools for a moment, listening to the soft sound of water splashing through ancient conduits. Picture the circular zodiac wheels turning slowly in the dark, their stars held high by silent nymphs. Look at the architectural flowers opening their petals to reveal secret chambers, and the colourful apothecary jars waiting on their shelves. The illustrations are a map of a human soul from the 15th century, a soul that found beauty in the strange, order in the complex, and peace in a world that no one else could see. As we prepare to leave the drawings behind and confront the text itself, the silent, elegant code that wraps around these images like a shroud, let the visual richness of this impossible world settle deep into your thoughts, shifting slowly into the quiet rhythm of a dream, leaving the dreamlike gardens, the celestial wheels, and the green labyrinth of subterranean pools behind us. We now turn our focus to the very heart of the enigma. We stand before the text itself, the relentless, elegant, and utterly silent script that flows across every single page of the Voynich Manuscript. If the illustrations are the vivid scenery of an unfamiliar country, the text is the native tongue of its invisible inhabitants. For over 600 years, this script has looked out from the vellum, teasing the human eye with its appearance of clarity, yet refusing to yield even a single sentence to the world's greatest cryptographers, linguists, and historians. When you sit quietly and look at a page of the manuscript, the first thing that strikes you is how completely normal it looks from a distance. It does not look like a chaotic collection of random symbols or a harsh geometric code. It has a beautiful, organic rhythm. The lines are straight and evenly spaced. The words are separated by clean, intentional intervals. The characters curve and loop with a natural grace that strongly resembles the humanistic scripts of early Renaissance Italy or the cursive styles used by medieval scholars in France and Germany. It looks so real, so thoroughly readable, that your brain automatically attempts to decipher it, expecting that if you just stare at it long enough, or tilt your head just right, the letters will suddenly snap into focus and reveal themselves as Old Latin or archaic Italian. But the moment you bring your eyes closer to the vellum, that illusion vanishes. Every letter becomes a ghost. Scholars who have spent their lives studying ancient writing systems, a field known as paleography, have broken down the Voynich alphabet into its individual components. They have discovered that the script is made up of roughly 20 to 30 distinct characters, with a few rare, exotic symbols appearing only once or twice throughout the entire volume. To help the modern world study this unreadable language without needing to handle the fragile vellum at Yale, researchers created a system called the European Voynich alphabet, or EVA. This system assigns a standard Western keyboard letter to each of the strange Voynich characters based on their visual appearance. Through the lens of EVA, we can talk about the specific letters that make up this mysterious tongue, which researchers affectionately call Voynichese. The individual characters are beautiful, almost whimsical in their design. Some look remarkably like the standard lowercase letters of our modern alphabet, such as I, M, N, or O. Others look like Arabic numerals, particularly the numbers 4 and 8. But then there are the gallows characters, so named because they feature tall, elegant vertical lines that rise high above the rest of the text, looping at the top to form structures that look like medieval gallows or the crossbeams of a grand gate. These gallows characters often feature complex double loops, or they are intertwined with other letters, looking like intricate ironwork or decorative knots. The way these letters combine to form words is where the true, mind-bending strangeness of Voynichese begins to reveal itself. A natural human language, whether it is English, Latin, Mandarin, or Arabic, follows certain statistical laws of structure. Letters are distributed in a way that reflects the physical limitations of the human throat and mouth. We need vowels to separate consonants, and certain combinations of sounds are naturally preferred because they are easy to pronounce. Voynichese follows rules, but they are rules that look nothing like any spoken language in human history. The structure of the words is rigidly, almost terrifyingly mathematical. In Voynichese, certain letters can only appear at the very beginning of a word. Other letters, particularly the tall gallows characters, are almost exclusively found in the middle of a word, sitting like sentinels between shorter symbols. A completely different set of characters is reserved strictly for the ends of words, acting as permanent punctuation marks for each individual unit of thought. This means that a word in the Voynich Manuscript is structured like a three-part puzzle: a mandatory prefix, a mandatory core, and a mandatory suffix. If a letter wanders out of its designated zone, if an end character accidentally appears at the beginning of a word, the entire system breaks down. No natural human language operates with this level of absolute, unyielding structural segregation. In English, the letter T can begin a word like time, sit in the middle of a word like water, or end a word like cat. In Voynichese, such freedom is completely forbidden. Furthermore, the language exhibits a phenomenon that cryptographers call extreme word-level repetition, or cannibalistic typography. As you trace a line of the text, you will frequently encounter the exact same word written twice, or even 3 times, right next to each other. Imagine reading a book in English where the text suddenly says, "The river, river, river flows down to the sea." It happens on almost every page of the manuscript. Sometimes, an entire line will consist of words that are nearly identical, differing by only a single character, creating a rhythmic, chanting pattern that looks more like a computer program a mathematical sequence, or a religious litany than a practical medical or historical record. This rigid orderliness is what broke the spirits of the world's greatest codebreakers during the 20th century. The story of the attempts to crack the Voynich Manuscript is a narrative of immense intellectual brilliance colliding with an immovable object. The assault on the code began in earnest during the dark days of World War II. At a secret facility in the United States, an elite group of cryptanalysts was assembled to break the military codes of the Axis powers. This group was led by a man named William Friedman, who is widely considered the father of modern American cryptology. Friedman was a genius of the highest order. He had spent his career shattering the most complex military ciphers in the world, including the highly sophisticated Japanese Purple Code. When Friedman was not breaking wartime ciphers, his thoughts turned to the Voynich Manuscript. He was completely captivated by it. In 1944, he gathered a volunteer group of elite codebreakers, men and women who spent their days analysing enemy communications, to form the Voynich Manuscript Study Group. They approached the medieval book with the same intense analytical firepower they used against wartime espionage. Friedman's team used early primitive punch-card computers to perform the very first statistical analyses of the text. They counted the frequency of every single character, mapped out which letters appeared next to each other most often, and looked for hidden patterns beneath the elegant script. They were hunting for a cipher. In traditional cryptography, a cipher involves taking a real message in a known language, like Latin or German, and systematically replacing the letters with different symbols to hide the meaning from prying eyes. The simplest form is a substitution cipher, where every A becomes a 4, every B becomes a gallows character, and so on. If the Voynich manuscript was written using a substitution cipher, Friedman knew it would be relatively easy to crack. Every language has a unique fingerprint based on letter frequency. In English, the letter E is always the most common. In Latin, vowels like A and I dominate. By matching the most common symbols in the Voynich manuscript with the most common letters in medieval Latin, the code should have unravelled like a ball of yarn. But it didn't. The statistical profile of Voynichese completely refused to align with Latin, Greek, Hebrew, Arabic, or any European vernacular tongue. When they analysed the text as a cipher, they found that it lacked the necessary flexibility of a real language. The word lengths were too uniform, there were almost no words with only 1 or 2 letters, and almost no words that were extremely long. The language was too orderly, too clean, and too predictable to be a message hidden behind a standard substitution cipher. Friedman eventually came to a radical, brilliant conclusion that shifted the entire direction of Voynich research. He suggested that the manuscript was not written in a code or a cipher at all. Instead, he hypothesized that it was written in an entirely artificial, constructed language. In the 17th century, philosophers like John Wilkins and Gottfried Leibniz became obsessed with the idea of creating a universal language, a pristine, logical tongue where every word was built from scratch to represent a specific scientific category. In such a language, a prefix might mean animal, the core might mean four-legged, and the suffix might mean predator, so that the word itself contained the exact scientific definition of a lion. If William Friedman was correct, the Voynich manuscript represents an attempt to create a universal philosophical language, executed in the early 15th century, 200 years before European philosophers officially began writing about the concept. It would mean the author was a linguistic pioneer of staggering proportions, inventing a fully functional, structurally rigid artificial language, complete with its own dedicated alphabet, simply to write down their private understanding of the cosmos. Friedman spent the final years of his life working on this theory, but the true meaning of the words eluded him to the very end. When he passed away, he left behind a massive archive of notes, a silver coin with a hidden Voynich code carved into his own tombstone, and an unbroken manuscript. In the decades that followed Friedman's work, the arrival of modern computing power allowed scientists to subject the text to even more rigorous tests. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, computer scientists applied algorithms designed to calculate information entropy, a mathematical measure of the complexity and randomness of a message. If you analyze a string of random gibberish letters typed by a monkey on a typewriter, the entropy is extremely high because there are no predictable patterns. If you analyze a real human language, the entropy falls into a specific, balanced sweet spot. It is predictable enough to be understood, but varied enough to convey complex, changing information. When computers calculated the entropy of the Voynich Manuscript, the results were stunning. The text has an incredibly low information entropy, significantly lower than English, Latin, or any spoken language. It is so highly structured, so intensely repetitive, that it looks less like a human talking and more like a mathematical chant or the code used in modern cryptography to verify data transmission. This discovery breathed new life into one of the most controversial theories in the history of paleography, the hoax theory. Proponents of this view argue that the reason the Voynich manuscript cannot be read is because there is absolutely nothing to read. They believe the book is a beautifully executed piece of medieval or Renaissance fraud, created by a clever charlatan who wanted to sell a secret book of ancient wisdom to a wealthy, gullible monarch for a fortune. To create such a hoax in the 15th century, an individual would need to be incredibly clever. They couldn't just write random scribbles, because a wealthy buyer or their court scholars would look at the pages and immediately notice the lack of pattern. The human brain is an expert at detecting randomness. To fool an expert, the hoaxer would need a system, a mechanical tool that allowed them to quickly generate thousands of realistic-looking words that maintained a consistent, organic appearance while remaining completely devoid of meaning. A researcher named Gordon Rugg demonstrated how this could have been done using a tool called a Cardano grill. A Cardano grill is a piece of parchment or metal with holes cut into it at specific intervals. By placing this grill over a pre-written table of prefixes, cores, and suffixes, and sliding it across the table, a scribe could instantly generate perfectly formed Voynich words. Because the table dictated which letters could combine, the resulting text would naturally possess the rigid mathematical structure, the segregated prefixes and suffixes, and the low entropy that defines Voynichese. It would allow a fraudster to fill 100 pages with beautiful, flowing text in a matter of weeks, without ever needing to think about a real message. Yet the hoax theory hits a massive wall of opposition from linguists who argue that the manuscript contains patterns that are far too subtle, far too deep, and far too complex for a medieval fraudster to have invented or even cared about. In 2013, a physicist named Marcello Montemurro published a groundbreaking study in the journal PLOS ONE. He used advanced statistical algorithms to analyze the relationship between the words in the manuscript and the illustrations next to them. Montemurro discovered that the vocabulary of the Voynich manuscript shifts systematically depending on which section of the book you are reading. The words that appear frequently in the botanical section surrounding the drawings of plants completely disappear when you enter the balneological section, where the naked women are bathing in their green pools. New words emerge to take their place, clustering heavily around the plumbing diagrams, only to vanish again when the book transitions into the astronomical wheels. This is exactly how a real textbook works. In an English medical encyclopedia, the word artery or ventricle will appear frequently in the chapter on the heart, but will disappear when you turn to the chapter on bone fractures, where words like femur and calcium take over. If the Voynich manuscript is a complete hoax created with a Cardano grill or random generations, why would the author go to the immense, agonizing trouble of ensuring that the meaningless words match the thematic subject matter of the drawings? How could they have managed such a feat without access to modern statistical computing to track their own output? This semantic consistency strongly suggests that the text is not a hollow fraud, It is a real message, carrying real meaning that is intimately tied to the bizarre images on the pages. In recent years, the internet age has opened up the Voynich Manuscript to a global audience, leading to a relentless wave of amateur and professional claims to have finally cracked the code. Every few months, headlines fly across the world declaring that a professor, a linguist, or an independent researcher has solved the mystery. Some claim it is an early form of proto-Romance, others swear it is an anagrammed version of medieval Hebrew, and some argue it is a phonetic representation of an ancient Aztec language brought back to Europe by early explorers. Yet, when these claims are subjected to the cold, hard light of peer review by true paleographers, they inevitably crumble. The solutions always rely on the same fatal flaw: selective reading. To make their system work, the researcher has to change the rules on every line. They decide that a certain character means A on page 1, but means S on page 2. They read one word from left to right, and the next from right to left, inserting missing vowels and ignoring letters that don't fit their preconceived translation. When you apply their methods to a random page of text, the system produces absolute gibberish. The manuscript breaks every cage that humanity tries to build around it. As you lie there in the quiet of the night, listening to the steady rhythm of this narrative, imagine the sheer weight of that collective human frustration. Think of the thousands of hours spent by the world's most brilliant minds, men who broke Nazi ciphers, supercomputers that process billions of calculations per second, linguists who mapped the evolution of human speech, all staring at the same small, vellum book, and all being completely defeated by it. The text remains completely unbothered by our modern curiosity. It does not yield, it does not compromise, and it does not change. The brown iron ghoul ink sits on the calfskin pages exactly as it did 600 years ago, flowing with that light, elegant, and confident touch. It is a silent monument to a language that either existed only in the mind of a single, forgotten soul, or belongs to a world of knowledge that we have completely lost the ability to comprehend. Let the elegant, looping lines of the text fade into the shadows of your mind, turning softly like the stars in the medieval sky, as we prepare to follow the physical book itself through the dark corridors of history, tracing the long trail of hands that held it before it was lost to time. The elegant, rhythmic loops of the unreadable script linger in the mind like the architecture of a forgotten city. But as we turn the page once more, the mystery shifts its shape. We leave behind the mathematical structure of the words and enter the world of shadows, dust, and royal archives. We begin to trace the physical journey of the book itself through the corridors of time. A book made with such immense labour, packed with such dense, secretive knowledge, does not simply appear out of nowhere in a Jesuit villa in 1912. It leaves a trail of breadcrumbs through history, a paper trail written in the ink of old letters, royal inventories, and the desperate diaries of alchemists. This is the story of the provenance of the Voynich Manuscript, a real-world historical detective story that leads us backward through the centuries, into a world of eccentric emperors, secret safes, and men who were willing to pay a king's ransom just to possess a riddle. To begin this backward journey, we must return to that first page of the manuscript which Wilfrid Voynich examined so closely under the soft light of his study. As we noted before, the first leaf is heavily darkened, worn thin by the touch of hands that are now long dead. But at the very bottom margin of that opening page, nature and chemistry have left a faint, ghostly clue. At some point in the 19th or 20th century, someone had attempted to erase an inscription written there, scraping the vellum with a knife or washing it with chemical solvents to clear the space. But old ink never completely leaves the skin of an animal. It sinks deep into the organic fibres, leaving an invisible chemical signature. When modern researchers placed that first page under the intense glare of ultraviolet light, the faded fibres glowed, and like a ghost materializing from a mist, a name appeared written in a fine, elegant 17th century hand: Jacobus de Tekenec. This name belongs to a real historical figure, a man named Jakub Horik Zet Tepence, who lived in Bohemia, what is now the Czech Republic, during the late 16th and early 17th centuries. Jakub was a fascinating character, a true child of the Renaissance. He born of humble origins, but possessed a brilliant, analytical mind for botany and chemistry. He became a Jesuit pharmacist and a master of herbal medicine, designing specialized chemical distillations and herbal remedies that became famous across Europe. His most celebrated creation was a magical, multi-purpose liquid cure, all known as aqua sinapis, or mustard water, which made him immensely wealthy. His medical fame caught the attention of the ultimate patron of eccentric science, the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II. In the early 1600s, Rudolf fell into a deep, agonizing melancholy, a severe depression that left him paralyzed with fear. Unable to govern his empire, and haunted by visions of conspiracies and demons. Desperate for help, the imperial court summoned Jakub Horik to the palace in Prague. Jakub mixed his specialized herbal distillations and administered them to the ailing emperor. Miraculously, Rudolf's health improved, his mind cleared, and in a fit of immense imperial gratitude, the emperor elevated the humble pharmacist to the nobility, granting him the title de Tekenec and appointing him the director of the Royal Botanical Gardens in Prague. The discovery of Jakub's signature at the bottom of the first page tells us that the Voynich Manuscript was physically present in the city of Prague during the golden, chaotic age of the imperial court of Rudolf II. It also tells us why it was there. Jakub, as a master pharmacist and director of the Botanical Gardens, would have looked at the massive botanical section of the manuscript and been utterly transfixed by it. He would have recognized it as a work of supreme botanical or chemical genius, an ultimate herbal guide written in a secret code to protect the recipes for life-saving medicines or alchemical transformations. But how did the manuscript get to Prague in the first place, before it fell into the hands of the royal pharmacist? To answer this, we must look into the mind of the emperor himself. Rudolf II was perhaps the most eccentric monarch in the history of Europe. He despised the brutal politics of his era and loathed the religious wars that were tearing his lands apart. Instead of ruling, he turned his massive castle in Prague, the Hradany, into a world-renowned sanctuary for the occult, the scientific, and the bizarre. Rudolf built a legendary Kunstkammer, a cabinet of curiosities that occupied entire wings of his palace. It was a chaotic, beautiful museum filled with astronomical clocks, mechanical automata, preserved crocodiles, unicorn horns, precious gemstones, and thousands of rare books. He gathered the most brilliant and dangerous minds of Europe to his court. The great astronomers Johannes Kepler and Tycho Brahe shared corridors with occult alchemists, metalworkers, and magicians who claimed they could talk to angels or transform lead into gold. Rudolf was obsessed with secret knowledge. He believed that the ancient world possessed a pristine, unified understanding of God, nature, and science that had been lost over the centuries due to the pride and conflicts of humanity. He believed this lost wisdom was hidden somewhere within old, forgotten books, written in allegories, ciphers, and symbols that only the truly enlightened could decode. He spent a massive portion of the imperial treasury buying every strange or ancient manuscript that came up for sale across Europe, instructing his ambassadors and spies to hunt through monasteries and private libraries for any volume that promised to hold the secrets of the universe. There is a historical letter written in 1665 by a Prague scholar named Johannes Marcus Marci, which was found tucked inside the front cover of the Voynich Manuscript when Wilfrid Voynich purchased it from the Jesuits. This letter is one of the most precious documents in the entire archive of the mystery, because it provides the direct link to the emperor's treasury. Marci wrote the letter to his friend Athanasius Kircher in Rome, and in it he casually drops a historical bombshell. He states that the book had once belonged to Emperor Rudolf II, and that Rudolf had purchased it for the staggering sum of 600 gold ducats. To understand the scale of that price, 600 gold ducats was an absolute fortune in the early 17th century. It was enough money to purchase a grand, multi-story stone house in the centre of Prague, or to pay the annual salary of a high-ranking court official or a general for an entire year. It was a sum that only an absolute monarch, driven by an intense, consuming obsession, would ever dream of paying for a single, small vellum book that no one could read. Why would Rudolf pay such an incredible price? The letter from Marci gives us another crucial piece of the puzzle. He notes that the person who sold the book to Rudolf believed it was written by Roger Bacon, the famous 13th century English Franciscan friar. Roger Bacon was a legendary figure in the history of science. He was a man born centuries ahead of his time, an early pioneer of the scientific method who wrote about the possibility of creating flying machines, magnifying lenses, motorized ships, and gunpowder. Because his ideas were so advanced, the medieval church viewed him with immense suspicion, confining him to house arrest for heresy. Folklore soon transformed Bacon into a grand wizard, a master of the secret arts who hid his most advanced scientific discoveries behind impenetrable codes and ciphers, so that the ignorant world would not misuse them. If Rudolf was told that this small book contained the secret, unedited, and coded scientific breakthroughs of Roger Bacon, including the secrets of long life, the mapping of the stars, and the distillation of the ultimate medicine, the emperor would have gladly opened his treasury and poured out the gold. This leads us to a fascinating content gap and a shadow line in the story. Who was the mysterious salesman who walked into the imperial palace in Prague, held up this bizarre book with its drawings of non-existent plants and naked women, whispered the magic name of Roger Bacon into the emperor's ear, and walked out with 600 gold coins? Historical suspicion falls heavily upon two extraordinary Englishmen who arrived in Prague in 1584. Matching this profile perfectly, John Dee and Edward Kelly. John Dee was one of the most brilliant men of Elizabethan England. He was the personal astrologer and scientific advisor to Queen Elizabeth I, a master mathematician, a brilliant geographer who helped map the British Empire, and the owner of the largest private library in England. But as Dee grew older, he became frustrated with the limitations of human science. He felt that human reason could only take him so far, and he became obsessed with contacting the source of all knowledge directly, the angels of God. To achieve this, Dee teamed up with a younger, far more dangerous man named Edward Kelly. Kelly was a classic Renaissance scoundrel. He was a trained apothecary who had his ears cropped in England for forging land deeds, a smooth-talking charlatan, and a powerful scryer, a medium who claimed he could look into a polished crystal ball or a mirror of black obsidian and see and hear the angels. Together, Dee and Kelly travelled across Europe, performing séances and alchemical experiments for wealthy nobles, eventually arriving at the court of Rudolf II in Prague. The diaries of John Dee are filled with records of their time in Bohemia. They detail complex rituals where Kelly would stare into the crystal ball and dictate long, elaborate messages from the angels in an entirely artificial language that the angels called Enochian. Enochian had its own unique, beautiful alphabet, its own rigid grammar, and a flowing, rhythmic sound that looks remarkably similar to the structure of Voynichese. More importantly, John Dee's journals record that, when he left England for the continent, he carried with him a large collection of rare manuscripts, including several works by Roger Bacon. There is a specific entry noting that at one point, while in Bohemia, Dee was in possession of a mysterious, unreadable book that was entirely written in a code, which he spent days trying to decipher. Did Edward Kelly, seeing the Emperor's bottomless wealth and his obsession with Roger Bacon, steal or buy this book from Dee's collection, use his incredible powers of persuasion to sell it to Rudolf for 600 ducats, and use the money to finance his own lavish lifestyle as a court alchemist? It is a theory that fits the timeline with astonishing precision, connecting the English occult revival directly to the halls of Prague Castle. But the story of the manuscript does not end with Rudolf's death. When the emperor passed away in 1612, his empire was already sliding into chaos. His cousin, Matthias, seized the throne, and the imperial treasury was dismantled to pay off debts. It was during this period of liquidation that the book likely passed from the royal collection into the hands of Jakob de Tachenec as payment for his medical services, or as a personal gift before the palace fell to invaders. When Jakob died in 1622, he left no heirs, and his property passed into the hands of a wealthy Prague alchemist and physician named Georgius Bartius. Bartius is a quiet, fascinating character who represents the true everyman of the Voynich mystery. He was not an emperor or a famous revolutionary. He was simply a lonely, highly educated scholar who found himself stuck in a room during the horrors of the 30 Years' War, staring at this unreadable book day after day, slowly losing his mind to its silence. We know about Bartius because of a collection of surviving letters that he sent to the outside world. He wrote to a brilliant Jesuit scholar in Rome named Athanasius Kircher. Kircher was the ultimate intellectual superstar of the 17th century, a man who claimed he could solve any puzzle, read any language, and explain any phenomenon in nature. He had published massive volumes on magnetism, acoustics, geology, and ancient cultures. Most importantly, Kircher had publicly claimed that he had successfully deciphered the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, showing the world that he could read the symbolic languages of the past. In 1639, Georgius Bartius wrote a long, respectful letter to Kircher in Rome. He explained that he had inherited a mysterious book that was written in an unknown character, filled with drawings of plants, stars, and strange processes. He confessed that he had spent years of intense, agonizing study trying to read it, but had achieved absolutely nothing. He called the book a sphinx that refused to answer. He included several photographic-like hand-copied extracts of the script and the illustrations, begging Kircher to look at them and use his immense genius to unlock the meaning. Kircher's response to Bartius has never been found, but we know from later records that Kircher was deeply intrigued by the fragments. He wanted the full book. However, Bartius was protective of his mystery. He refused to send the actual manuscript away, keeping it locked in his private study in Prague until his death. When Bartius passed away, the manuscript was inherited by his closest friend and fellow scholar, Johannes Marcus Marci. Marci was a towering figure in the history of Czech science. He was the official physician to the Holy Roman Emperors, the Dean of the University of Prague, and a brilliant physicist who conducted pioneering research into the physics of light and rainbows. Predating Isaac Newton, Marci knew how deeply Bartius had suffered trying to crack the book, and he too was fascinated by it. But as Marci grew old and felt his own death approaching in 1665, he made a decision to send the book away from Prague entirely. Marci packed the small vellum-bound volume into a heavy wooden crate, wrapped it carefully to protect it from the dampness of the long journey across Europe, and addressed it to Athanasius Kircher at the Collegio Romano in Rome. Inside the crate, he slipped that historic letter we discussed earlier, the letter that documented Rudolf's purchase and the legend of Roger Bacon. Marci wrote to Kircher, saying, "This book, left to me by my closest friend Georgius Bartius, has been gathering dust in my study. I know of no one in the world who is better suited to solve this riddle than you. Take it, read it, and let the world know what it says. When the crate arrived in Rome, Athanasius Kircher opened it, lifted out the Voynich Manuscript, and read Marty's letter. But here, the paper trail hits a massive, impenetrable wall of historical silence. Kircher, the man who claimed he could decipher anything, never published a single word about the manuscript. He never mentioned it in his books, he never wrote a letter explaining its contents, and he left no notes tucked within its pages. Did Kircher look at the flowing script, apply his grand decoding systems, realize that he was completely defeated by it, and quietly hide it away in the back of his library to protect his reputation as an infallible genius? Or did he see something in those drawings of naked women and strange chemical tubes that frightened him, something that suggested dark alchemy or heresy, leading him to decide that the book was best left forgotten in the deep vaults of the church? For the next 250 years, the Voynich Manuscript disappeared from human history. It became a ghost, sitting silently on a shelf in the vast, labyrinthine library of the Collegio Romano. As the centuries rolled past, the world changed outside the stone walls of the college. The Renaissance gave way to the Enlightenment, the steam engine was invented, modern science dismantled the old alchemical world of Rudolf II. Yet, the small book remained untouched, its iron gall ink slowly turning brown in the dark, its vellum pages gathering the dust of the ages, completely hidden from the eyes of the world. The book only re-emerged because of a political storm that erupted in Italy in the late 19th century. In 1870, the armies of King Victor Emmanuel II marched into Rome, unifying Italy and absorbing the old papal states into the new modern kingdom. The new Italian government immediately began to confiscate the property of the Catholic Church, particularly the grand monasteries and colleges, seizing their immense libraries to turn them into public state archives. The Jesuit priests at the Collegio Romano were desperate to protect their most precious and ancient books from being confiscated by the secular state. To do this, they carried out a massive, highly secretive operation. They took their most valuable manuscripts and discreetly moved them out of the main library, hiding them in boxes and trunks, and transferring them to the private archives of the General of the Order, or to remote, extraterritorial properties owned by the Church that the Italian police could not legally enter. One of these sanctuaries was the beautiful Via Mondragone on the hillsides of Frascati. The books were placed into heavy wooden chests, locked tightly, and stored in a dark room beneath the stone arches of the villa. The priest left them there for decades, waiting for the political tensions to fade. The memory of what was inside those chests slowly faded as the old priests died out, until the books became nothing more than an anonymous line in a forgotten inventory. Until the morning of 1912, when a sharp-eyed Polish book dealer named Wilfried Voynich walked through the door, turned a key in an old lock, and pulled the manuscript back out into the light of the modern sun. As you reflect on this extraordinary historical journey, let the geography of the story settle into your thoughts. Visualize the small, simple book travelling through the snowbound streets of early Renaissance Prague, carried up the grand stairs of the Hrdení Castle to be placed into the trembling, eager hands of Emperor Rudolf II. Picture the alchemist Georgius Bartius sitting by a single candle while the cannons of the 30 Years' War echo outside his window, tearing his hair out over the looping characters. Follow the heavy wooden crate as it rattles on a carriage across the Alps, down through the sunny plains of Italy, and into the quiet cloisters of Rome. The book is more than a linguistic puzzle, it is a physical survivor. It carries within its leather, binding the ambitions, the obsessions, and the profound frustrations of kings, alchemists, doctors, and priests across 6 centuries. It has been loved, feared, hidden, and chased for a fortune, yet through it all, it has maintained its absolute, unbroken privacy. As we prepare to enter the final movement of our journey, where we will look at the ultimate grand theories that attempt to resolve this riddle once and for all, Let the long line of these historical hands hold your thoughts, calming your mind with the deep, slow rhythm of time passing in the dark. The long line of historical hands that once held this volume fades back into the mist of the centuries, leaving us once more in the pristine silence of the modern archive, staring down at the open pages of MS-408. We have traced its physical body, walked through its impossible dream gardens, mapped its concentric heavens, and followed its secret flight through royal courts and hidden vaults. Now we arrive at the final, most profound territory of this journey, the grand theories of resolution. When everything has been measured, when the ink has been tested by lasers and the vellum dated by the decay of atoms, the human mind is still left with the ultimate, burning question: what is this book trying to tell us? To answer this, modern scholarship has split into a series of deeply fascinating camps, each offering a radically different window into the soul of the author. These theories are not merely dry academic exercises, they are profound explorations of human psychology, creative isolation, and the boundaries of language itself. They represent the final attempts of humanity to break the silence of the world's most mysterious book. And as we weigh them in the quiet of the night, they offer a strange, comforting map of how the human mind searches for meaning in the dark. The first major school of thought takes us deep into the dangerous, flickering world of medieval heresy and religious survival. To understand this perspective, we have to immerse ourselves completely in the spiritual landscape of Western Europe during the early 15th century. This was a time of intense, terrifying conformity. The medieval church held an absolute monopoly on truth, thought, and salvation. To think differently, to interpret the Bible outside the Latin commentary of the priests, or to hold private ideas about the nature of God and the cosmos, was not just an intellectual disagreement. It was a mortal sin, punishable by the agonizing fire of the stake. Proponents of the heretical secret theory argue that the Voynich Manuscript is a sacred text belonging to a lost underground religious sect, such as the Cathars, the Waldensians, or the Bogomils. Many of these groups believed in a profound spiritual dualism, that the material world, including the physical human body, was inherently corrupt, created by a lesser, flawed deity, while the true spirit was a spark of divine light trapped within the flesh. To liberate this light, one had to undergo complex spiritual purifications, often involving sacred communal baths, strict dietary restrictions, and a deep reverence for nature as a living, symbolic textbook written by God. When we look at the illustrations through this heretical lens, the bizarre imagery suddenly begins to take on a coherent, deeply spiritual meaning. The balneological section, with its networks of green pools and naked women interacting within complex conduits, ceases to look like medical plumbing or a guide to hot springs. Instead, it becomes a visual manual for spiritual baptism and purification rituals. The nymphs are not patients, they are the souls of the faithful, cleansing themselves in the liquid grace of the universe, moving through the stages of spiritual ascent. The botanical section, with its hybridized, impossible plants, becomes a collection of allegorical symbols. In medieval heretical literature, secret spiritual truths were often described as hidden seeds or celestial flowers that could only grow in the garden of the enlightened soul. Writing these sacred doctrines in a standard language like Latin or German would have been an act of suicide. The moment an inquisitor raided the community's house, the text would have been read, the heresy exposed, and the community burned to ashes. Therefore, the author invented an entirely new, pristine alphabet and a structurally segregated language, a holy tongue untouched by the corrupt world outside, specifically to preserve the spiritual heritage of their people. If this theory is correct, the Voynich Manuscript is a lone survivor of a forgotten faith, a silent sanctuary where a community hidden in the valleys of Italy or France locked away their prayers, their cosmology, and their rituals, throwing the key away so that the Inquisition could never violate their sacred truths. The second grand theory shifts our focus entirely from a collective community to the isolated brilliance of a single, lonely mind. This is the theory of the autonomous constructed language, or the lonely genius hypothesis. This perspective argues that the manuscript is not a code meant to hide a message from enemies, but rather the highly organized, lifelong notebook of a radical Renaissance scholar who found existing human languages completely inadequate to describe the complexity of the universe. In the early 1400s, the intellectual world was heavily constrained by scholasticism. Knowledge was rigidly categorized according to ancient authorities like Aristotle and Galen. But human curiosity was beginning to burst at the seams. Imagine a brilliant young thinker sitting in a university town in Germany or northern Italy, looking at the natural world and realizing that human words were clumsy, imprecise tools. In Latin, the word for a plant or a star was completely arbitrary. It told you nothing about how the object actually functioned or where it fit in the grand chain of being. This lonely genius decided to correct the mistakes of Babel. They set out to create a perfect logical language from scratch, a system where the very shape of the letters and the structure of the words would perfectly mirror the laws of nature. As we explored in the linguistic analysis, every word in Voynichese is built with a rigid mathematical architecture. A prefix defining a category, a core defining a subset, and a suffix defining a specific attribute. The author spent decades developing this monumental system, refining the alphabet until it flowed from their pen with that smooth, unhesitating fluidity that leaves modern paleographers in awe. The manuscript became their private universe, a place where they could catalogue their research into botany, astronomy, and human biology using their pristine, perfect language. They weren't hiding their work from the world out of fear. They simply didn't care if anyone else could read it. They were writing for an audience of one, or perhaps for God alone, constructing a beautiful, silent cathedral of pure reason on the skins of calves. But as the night grows deeper and the shadows lengthen across the page, we must confront the darkest and most controversial explanation: the grand hoax theory. This perspective, held by many hard-nosed cryptographers and historians, strips away the romanticism of hidden faiths and lonely geniuses, replacing it with the cynical, brilliant theatre of Renaissance fraud. The early 15th century was a golden age for the rare book trade. Wealthy princes, merchant barons, and eccentric monarchs were obsessed with collecting luxury items, particularly books that promised to contain lost ancient knowledge, alchemical formulas, or occult secrets. A single unique manuscript could command a price that could set a craftsman up for life. Proponents of this theory argue that the Voynich Manuscript was created by a highly sophisticated team of medieval counterfeiters who understood the psychology of their target market perfectly. They knew that a wealthy collector didn't actually want a book they could read easily. A book written in plain Latin could be judged, criticized, and potentially exposed as common knowledge. What a wealthy patron truly desired was an impenetrable mystery, a book that looked incredibly profound, felt immensely ancient, and hinted at secrets so deep that only a lifetime of study could unlock them. The fraudsters set to work with immense skill. They procured a large batch of high-quality vellum, aging it carefully to ensure its authenticity. They mixed standard iron gall ink and natural mineral pigments, perfectly matching the artistic style of the era's medical herbals. To generate the text, they didn't sit down and write random gibberish because they knew the human eye would instantly spot the lack of pattern. Instead, they invented a simple, mechanical trick, such as a series of wooden dice with prefixes, cores and suffixes carved into the faces, or a set of parchment stencils like the Cardano grill. By rolling the dice or sliding the stencils across a master grid of letters, a scribe could rapidly write, line after line, of beautifully balanced, highly repetitive, yet completely meaningless text. Their pen flew across the vellum with absolute confidence because they didn't have to think about meaning. They were simply following a mechanical rhythm, letting the loops and curves form themselves. They drew bizarre plants that combined random elements of different species to puzzle the court botanists, painted circles of naked women to hint at forbidden medical secrets, and added suns with human faces to suggest deep astrological insights. Once the volume was bound in its simple, unpretentious vellum cover, they took it to the grand markets of Central Europe, or directly to the castle of a monarch like Rudolf II, spinning a masterful web of lies about how the book had been uncovered in a ruined monastery or salvaged from the tomb of an ancient magician like Roger Bacon. They collected their fortune and vanished into history, leaving behind a magnificent, hollow shell, a beautifully constructed labyrinth that leads absolutely nowhere, designed specifically to trap human curiosity in a permanent loop of frustration. Yet just as the mind begins to accept this cynical resolution, the manuscript pushes back, revealing a fourth and deeply moving possibility, the concept of glossolalia, or an expression of neurodivergence, the internal symphony theory. This perspective looks at the book not as a cold fraud or a rigid science project, but as the raw, unfiltered output of a highly unique human mind, experiencing a state of hypergraphia, or intense spiritual ecstasy. Hypergraphia is a real psychological condition characterized by an overwhelming, unstoppable desire to write. It is often associated with specific neurological variations such as temporal lobe epilepsy or deep states of manic creativity. An individual experiencing this condition does not write to communicate with an audience. They write because the pressure of language within their mind becomes an absolute flood that must be released onto whatever surface is available. Imagine a soul living in the 15th century, experiencing the world with an overwhelming, kaleidoscopic intensity that no one around them can understand. In their mind, thoughts do not move in slow, orderly sentences. They arrive as grand, simultaneous symphonies of colour, shape, and sound. They see the plants in the fields not as static weeds, but as complex, breathing creatures wired into the movement of the stars. They see the circulation of fluids through the earth and the flesh as a single, massive, flowing river of life. Unable to find comfort in the rigid world of medieval society, this individual shuts themselves away in a private room with stacks of blank parchment. They pick up a quill, and as the internal symphony begins to play, their hand begins to move. They don't think about grammar, ciphers, or definitions. They let the internal music flow directly through their fingers onto the page. The letters they draw are the physical shapes of the sounds playing in their head, loops that climb, gallows that guard, and stars that mark the rhythm of their thoughts. They paint the plants exactly as they see them in their dreams, hybridized, living structures with roots that feel and flowers that think. They draw the circles of women bathing because it represents the overwhelming sensation of immersion, of being washed clean by the liquid energy of existence. The manuscript is a direct, unedited map of a human consciousness operating on a completely different frequency than the rest of humanity. It is beautiful, it is consistent, and it possesses deep internal patterns, because the human brain inherently possesses structure, even when it is operating outside the boundaries of shared reality. If this is the truth of MS-408, then it is perhaps the most intimate book ever created, a pure, unshielded look into the interior of a human soul that found its peace only when its pen was moving across the skin of the vellum. As we lay these grand theories side by side in our thoughts, we realize something remarkable about the Voynich Manuscript. The true power of this book does not lie in what it says, but in what it elicits from us. It behaves like a perfect mirror for the human intellect. When a codebreaker looks at it, they see a brilliant cipher. When a linguist looks at it, they see a constructed language. When a historian looks at it, they see a heretical survival or a royal hoax. And when an artist looks at it, they see a masterpiece of pure imagination. The book allows everyone to find exactly what they are searching for. matching their intelligence, their biases, and their dreams step for step, while its true nature remains completely untouched, pristine, and beautifully aloof. Let your thoughts drift back to that small, temperature-controlled room at Yale University, where the manuscript sits tonight beneath its thick glass case. The museum is dark now. The visitors have all gone home, the streets outside are quiet, and the modern world is asleep. Inside the case, the faded brown ink rests silently on the ivory calfskin. The roots continue to twist into their geometric knots. The suns, with their quiet human faces, continue to stare out at the empty room, and the rings of silent nymphs continue to hold their stars high against the dark, spinning their slow eternal dance through the medieval cosmos. The book has outlived every person who ever tried to own it, every scholar who ever tried to read it, and every supercomputer that tried to break it. It has won. It has achieved the ultimate form of immortality that any creation can ever hope for. It has become a permanent question, an everlasting riddle that keeps human curiosity alive, reminding us that despite all our advanced science and our mountain of data, there are still deep, beautiful secrets in our history that completely defy our control. Are you still awake, drifting there in the quiet space between the past and the present? If you have travelled with me all the way to this final page, through the gardens, the stars, the hidden archives, and the grand theories, I want to thank you for spending this evening with me. If you are still awake and would love to keep this peaceful journey going, you can let the next video play, slipping smoothly into another corner of history as you close your eyes. Before you drift off completely, please take just a moment to like this video, leave a soft comment about where this story found you tonight, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Your support is the quiet fuel that keeps these late-night journeys alive for everyone who needs them. Let your shoulders drop completely now. Let the last thoughts of codes, ciphers, and ancient secrets dissolve into the soft rhythm of your breathing. Adjust your pillow one final time. Feel the deep comfort of the warm blanket around you, and let your mind drift down into the silent, green pools of sleep. Have a wonderful, peaceful, and good night's sleep.